Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of Liam Picks Fights Live. And I figured that a lot of people are going to be taking a few weeks off. A lot of people are going to be taking the time to relax with friends and family. And I totally get that. But I also figured there's some people out there that are going to be itching for some UFC content and they're going to be struggling these last couple weeks. We're not dealing with any upcoming UFC events, but we do have fights to look forward to. We've got published lines on a lot of these fights. And so I've already gotten to work getting my resources together. And I wanted to get some content out for you guys as early as possible to make sure that we hit all of our bases. So you know that I'm going to come back for bets and banter. I'm going to have a great guest. I'm going to have well thought out opinions on each and every one of these fights. I'm going to do my tape. I'm going to do my due diligence. But right now, it's the holiday season. So I want to sit back with all you guys. I want to enjoy this fight card. I want to see if we can find some early line value. I want to see if we can potentially, find a jump and, some early edges on these fights. But most importantly, I want to have a great discussion with all you guys, sharpest chat in the game. So appreciate each and every one of you guys that made the time to be here tonight. I'm fresh out of training. I'm in a great mood. I got a cup of coffee rolling, so I couldn't feel any better. And is it the best UFC card that we have on paper? No. But when we're starved of it for 2, 3, 4 weeks of no action in a row, we're going to be eagerly anticipating the return. And what fight card are we talking about? We're talking, of course, about Magomed Ankalaev against Johnny Walker 2. And yes, they did this before, but a lot like a lot of Magomed Ankalaev fights, we haven't been getting the conclusions that we are looking for here. We've got on the one hand a Magomed Ankalaev that had a no contest in his last fight, right? Could have easily been a disqualification in that bout against Johnny Walker. But we look just one fight prior, a lot of people thought that it could have went the way, of Ankalaev, but instead, the judges call it a draw and we get an inconclusive result. It left the light heavyweight title vacant, if you remember. That's why we ended up with Vieira taking on Ferreira for the vacant light heavyweight title. Yes, Freak says, Liam, you are Jewish. Stop it. I am not, my brother. I am an Irish Catholic and have been all my life. But I appreciate the sentiment. Respect for all my people around the world. If you are a Christian or just a person that celebrates Christmas around the world, hey, cheers to you. Thanks for watching. And if not, happy holidays nonetheless. We appreciate you being here and much love and God bless you nonetheless. But I am a Christian, my friend. I appreciate you asking. And shout out to Cole, regular viewer, says, yo, Liam, happy holidays. Cheers to you, my brother. Absolutely. We got the Conor McGregor Merry Christmas, the absolutely fook and nobody sweater on today. Shout out to Kristen as well, future guest of the program. I said we're going to bring some women on the show. There's a lot of talented female handicappers out there, and we're not getting the numbers in terms of females viewing the show. And so we're very appreciative of the women that do check out the show, Kristen being one of them. And, let's get back into the action, though. With that being said, and we've got, Johnny Walker, on the other hand, he's a guy that is definitely a fan favorite, definitely a funny guy, a likable guy. He's got a great personality. But we saw a little bit of that defensive vulnerability in the last fight. We definitely saw, a willingness to get into the fire and exchange a little bit. But Johnny Walker, what are his assets? What are the things that he brings to the table? Number one, he's a massive underdog in a light heavyweight fight. Let's talk about that off the rip. Johnny Walker's a guy that, he's not going to win every fight, right? He's got some defensive liabilities. He's got many losses via knockout, but we also know that he's really dangerous in terms of his offensive upside in the early going. He goes out there and he puts on a pretty violent display at his best. And we saw he's kind of had a tale of two careers in the UFC so far, right? Where you've seen, he came out, he was getting explosive finishes, explosive wins. But I tweeted the other day, what is his best win, really? He doesn't have a great list of wins in the organization. He's fought some tough guys, but he fought Jamal Hill, got knocked out in that fight. Fought Thiago Santos, got a unanimous decision loss there. Could have went either way, kind of a toss-up fight. not in the sense of how it was going to be judged. Obviously, Santos deserved the win, but it was a fight that was well within his reach, and he kind of just let it slip away from him, right? Just let the close rounds go to his more experienced opponent there in Thiago Santos. He lost a gross grappling based match to Nikita Krylov. If you guys remember that fight, Johnny didn't look horrible on the mat. He was able to scramble with Krylov. He didn't get submitted like a lot of guys would have in that position, but his awkwardness and his length wasn't enough to save him. His takedown defense wasn't there. His grappling chops looked a little bit sloppy. I do think we've seen some improvements in his grappling decision making since going to SBG Ireland. I know a lot of people clown on the gym, and I'm an Irishman, right? I've disclosed, my biases up front, but I'm just looking at a guy in Johnny Walker who went from being very poor positionally on the ground to making some better decisions, trying to defend takedowns a little bit better, and being more of a threat with his offensive jiu-jitsu. Where did we see that? In the Iwan Cutelaba fight. A guy who went out there aggressively trying to wrestle him in the first round. And we saw the length become a real factor for Johnny Walker. It allowed him to get a submission hold that otherwise he probably wouldn't have been able to get. And when I'm looking at a guy like Johnny Walker, he seemed in the Anthony Smith fight not to be as dangerous as he used to be, but to be a lot more smart and patient than he used to be, and a little bit better at picking his shots. So here's the thing about Ankalaev, right? He's clearly the more talented guy. He's being priced accordingly, but he doesn't have quite the same size frame as Johnny Walker. Johnny's got that big, long, awkward frame, and that hasn't always saved him in his fights. However, we've seen Magomed Ankalaev. I said, what is his best win in the UFC? He's definitely got the better list of wins. He beat Nikita Krylov, right? Common opponent. But another common opponent is Paul Craig, the Bear Jew. And while Magomed Ankalaev won many of the minutes of that fight, his only loss in the UFC was in his UFC debut. He got submitted by Paul Bear Jew Craig, a middleweight at this point, right? A guy who's moved down in weight classes. So I do think that's something to note, because Johnny Walker is a guy that could easily compete at heavyweight. He's a big guy. I don't think he could possibly compete at 185. He's 6'6" or something like that. Just a massive guy for this division. So I do think that Johnny Walker presents some interesting challenges for Ankalaev, with his size. But Ankalaev should have the superior skills, and skills more often than not win the fights. But you look at a guy like Ankalaev, and the things that stand out as being potentially nerve-wracking when you're betting on a big favorite, a bunch of non-conclusive results. I mentioned at the beginning the no contest with Johnny Walker last time out. He's lucky that wasn't a disqualification. If you get disqualified at minus 450, you still lose the money, right? Same thing with Jan Blachowicz, right? A lot of people expected him to roll there. Jan Blachowicz ended up closing a massive underdog. I bet Jan in that spot right at close because it got to a big plus money price. I'm like, man, Jan Blachowicz, he's probably going to keep it close. And on the night of, I thought the draw was the right result. But on rewatch, I thought Ankalaev deserved the nod there, albeit close. I thought he deserved the first round. In a close round, I thought that rounds 2 and 3 went to Blachowicz, but I thought rounds 4 and 5 went to Ankalaev. So he's definitely got the cardio to compete for 5 rounds, but the leg kicks were bothering him. I think that's a tool that Johnny Walker could really try and utilize in this spot. Yes, he was able to tank through it, but he did take a lot of damage there and look uncomfortable. So I think that that's something to watch out for if you're trying to game plan for Johnny Walker. What should he try and leverage here? He should try and avoid getting chinned and use his long frame to set up some low kicks and try and damage this guy, because we've seen that hurt him in the past. Kristen in the comments says, you never know what you'll get with Walker. Ankalaev, much more consistent. True, but consistent to a point, right? Even the Iwan Cutelaba fight, the first time that they ran it had some controversy because Iwan Cutelaba was acting the fool. But it was a spot there where Ankalaev kind of got the benefit of the doubt. And then the next time they ran it, he brutally knocked out Cutelaba. That was a disgusting finish. One of the cleanest knockouts you'll see in the Ankalaev career. But again, the names that he was beating early on in his UFC run, Marcin Prachnio, Klidson Abreu, Dalton Lugiambula, Iwan Cutelaba twice in a row. And then when he started to step up in competition, the finishes weren't really materializing. He was starting to get tagged a little bit more by the Nikita Krylovs, the Volkan Ozdemirs, and the Thiago Santoses of the division. But with that being said, I do think Ankalaev is just a better talent, projects a little bit higher. So I'd have to favor him to win here. but I don't think I could lay the minus 450 type of price tag. I think that's too wide. Clay says, "Hola, Liam, get COVID. Was looking for something to fall asleep to. Hey, shout out to you, brother. I appreciate you watching the show live. Huzzah, and I hope you feel better, my man." So yeah, guys, I don't think we should overcomplicate this main event. On the first look, we always start with the main event. So that's why we started with this one. But it's not the most compelling fight for me on the card. I do think, I favor Ankalaev, but if there's been no parlay buster, I'll be sitting there with my hands, potentially, just seeing if I can find that late value. Because the other thing is, I do think a lot of parlays will be anchored with Ankalaev on this card. I do expect him to win, but this line will probably continue to move in one direction. I expect a lot of people to be on the Ankalaev side here. So I'll probably just wait and see what this number gets to, because I do believe in the principle of the light heavyweight division being volatile. And this is a division I've historically been profitable in. So I'm going to just continue to ride my theories. And my theory for light heavyweight is that really most people can't be a massive favorite. I do think because Ankalaev has takedown upside here, you can't rule that out. He could just take down Johnny Walker and ride out some top position. But I noted some of the grappling improvements from Johnny Walker and the long, awkward body type. So I don't know that that's going to be easy sailing. And then on the feet, it's a volatile enough matchup where I expect Ankalaev to have the clear advantage in skill, in his positioning. But I think Johnny Walker is probably just a little bit more athletic and a little bit, more dynamic. So it's an interesting matchup to run back here for a main event setting. And Johnny Walker does have main event experience. He's gone 5 rounds before, hasn't gone his way, but he did seem like he had the cardio to go 5. So I think that's another interesting note here. Not a 3-round bout like the last time. Maybe they'll start a little bit slower. Maybe they'll be measuring each other. One thing I've noticed is I've lost a lot of money in the light heavyweight division betting on fights not to go the distance, because oftentimes they're heavily chalked, and you really got to be very confident to lay that kind of chalk price. Because even in these 5-round main events, Magomed Ankalaev has been a big culprit. Johnny Walker, Thiago Santos, another great example. Heavily chalked fights not to go the distance that end up going in the light heavyweight division. So just a couple things for you guys to think about from a long-term trends perspective. Shout out to Blaze, says, "Liam, what's good, brother? Appreciate you being here, my man." Shout out to Jake Fagan with the $5 dono. Longtime listener of the program. Thank you so much, Jake. He says, "One of the hardest workers and sharpest people in the game. Congratulations to you on your growth this year. I know it will continue next year." Thank you, my man. The goal next year is 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. No more fucking around. No more playing games. No more small growth. We're going big time growth. We're not doubling it. We're doing more than that. And we're going to do it by being consistent. We're going to do it by putting in a ton of work, and we're going to do it by continuing to try and be high effort, but also high positivity. We're not here to be a downer on your day. I'm not here to tell you I'm smarter than you or I think I know everything. That's not the way it is on this show. I'm just going to tell you how I feel. I'm going to tell you the things that I think. I'm going to tell you the research I've done, and I'm going to tell you my past experience. I've been betting profitably on MMA for 3 years now, tracked, all third party. And that's what I try and do, is put people in a position to win. I've been thinking about this. I've been writing out some basics of gambling for beginners, some tools to try and help people win, because the ethos of this show from the very beginning has been good guys versus the bookies. So truly appreciate, what you guys have done in terms of supporting the show, everybody who's watching right now. And my man, Jake, longtime supporter. Thank you very much for the dono, brother. Means the world. Ramsey says, "You're predicting a fight in 1 month time. You don't watch Muay Thai or boxing." It's not to say that I don't watch them, but I'm not going to come to you like I'm an expert in Muay Thai, because I'm not an expert in Muay Thai. I am an expert in the UFC, especially in the roster of fighters in the UFC and in the Dana White Contender Series. Now, that being said, I've done content on boxing before. I've done content on celebrity boxing and Jake Paul boxing Ben Askren and these kind of crossover events in the past. If you guys want more boxing content and coverage from me, I'm happy to do that. But most of the time I lean into what my audience asks for, and my audience likes to talk about MMA. They asked me to do more content early about the fights. So that's what I'm trying to do here. But I am a guy who's open to suggestions. So if you guys have thoughts on what you'd want to see from the channel, additional coverage, things like that, go ahead and shoot that down in the comment section below. I did have a couple comments on the boxing matches on Twitter. I was thinking to myself, maybe I should handicap these boxing matches, but frankly, I didn't know how much interest there was. So guys, if that's something that you'd like to see from the channel, if you say it, I know, but if you don't say it, I don't know. So it's the easiest public opinion research in the world. I try and read all the comments and answer them as much as possible as well. So appreciate that. Shout out to Eric, says, you and a few other people have been very helpful educating me and dabbling with sports gambling as a fun side hobby. So thank you, good sir. I appreciate that, my brother. Everybody's got a different journey, right? And so for some of us, we're here as trying to be a professional. Some people, we're here to be recreational. Some people, we're here to just have fun. There's no problem with any of that on this show. I'll always tell you guys the way I'm trying to approach it. I'm trying to win. I'm trying to be serious. I'm trying to be thoughtful, but I'm also playing long-term. I'm trying to play into an edge, and I'm trying to think strategically and make sure that every time that I'm betting, I'm putting myself in a position to stay in the game, because that's the most important. So that's what we're trying to do here. I appreciate the support and the kind words. And with that being said, we got plenty more fights to break down. We got great people still rocking with us in the chat. So let's move to this co-main event of the evening. Fascinating flyweight matchup. And guys, I'll tell you where I do well. I'll tell you where I do poorly. The truth is, doing my end of the year analysis, I noticed I have not been profitable in the flyweight division for men's or women's MMA. Now, for the women's MMA side of things, I actually know the root of that loss. I would be slightly negative in the flyweight division overall, but I'm very negative because of a massive loss I took on Amanda Hebos against Ketlen Chookagian. Still think she won that fight, but it was very close, went the other way. I had 9 units on Amanda Hebos at plus 165, but this is why we stress some of the lessons that we learn over time. I was a little aggressive there in a women's MMA fight. I thought that there was insane line value. I thought she should have been the minus 200 favorite, but overall that assessment wasn't correct in hindsight. So you got to learn the lessons over time. Now, what's interesting is when you're looking at the flyweight division for the men, I'm only about minus 1 unit lifetime, but that's still not positive, right? So I'll tell you guys where I do well. I'll tell you where I do poorly. In the flyweight division, I've had bouts of success, right? I've had Tetsuro Taira. He's made me a ton of money, like 20 units, but also I've had, blind spots. I've had, over betting on fights not to go the distance, certain things like this. So you have to look at your own betting habits and realize, hey, these are some leaks. These are some problems I'm having. I want to clean these up in the future. Because if you're not learning, you're going to make the same mistakes over again, right? We're always just trying to learn from our mistakes time in and time out. What's interesting is last iteration of this fight, this is a rematch, right? At the top, we got a rematch in the light heavyweight division. In the co-main event, we got a rematch in the flyweight division. When this fight took place the first time, guys, I was doing content on YouTube. I put out a video about why I thought Matheus Nicolau would win this fight. I bet him as an underdog at the time. And the thing is, when I'm looking at this spot in the rerun, he's a bigger underdog, right? And I'm less inclined to bet him on this rerun. Now, I'm not the best at betting rematches either. I want to go back and look at my overall results on rematches, but my results on rematches recently has been up and down for sure. I could give you guys a recent example of Royval and Pantoja. When they fought the first time, I bet Pantoja at chalk. I got it right. I made the money. When they fought the second time, I bet Royval at dog odds, and I lost the bet. So you look, and I'm not saying that I'm a perfect predictor of these fights over time. Sometimes I'll get it wrong. Sometimes I'll switch sides and get it right. Sometimes I'll switch sides and get it wrong. An example of me switching sides and getting it right is the Stipe trilogy, the Stipe matchup with Ngannou, right? I picked Stipe the first time they fought because of the championship experience. And then I picked Ngannou the second time they fought because of the championship experience, right? So when I'm looking at this spot, I really have a bad feeling for a guy like Nicolau in this matchup because he's taking on a guy in Manel Kape who is a very explosive finisher, right? He's a guy with a lot of power. He's recorded, I believe, 5 knockdowns in his last 4 UFC fights. That's a very impressive stat when you consider the division we're talking about, right? If a heavyweight was doing that, that's one thing. We're talking about the flyweight division where not every fighter can record a knockdown at all. This guy has been recording a ton of them. Now, on the Matheus Nicolau side, he hasn't been a slouch either. I believe he's 8-3 to the knockdown in this division. So he's done a good job being precise. But what's different to me is that Matheus Nicolau has really caught a bunch of guys that were not very durable. For example, Matt Schnell, not a historically durable fighter. When you look back, he was able to drop, I believe, Smolka 3 times. He was able to drop Bruno Correa, although Bruno Correa was able to drop him as well. But when I'm looking at this matchup, Manel Kape came into the UFC and he looked a little bit tentative. He looked a little bit awkward. And I think part of that was the difference between competing with and without wrestling shoes. I mean, if you guys have ever, trained with wrestling shoes versus without wrestling shoes, it's a massive difference, right? Your ability to get control of somebody's leg or their foot is massively different when they have shoes on and when they don't have shoes on, for example. So I think that when you look at a guy like Kape, he's used to having traction. He's used to being able to create explosive power. And he kind of came into the octagon where we've seen guys that have been in the octagon many times slip, fall on the canvas because it's slick at times. So I think Kape needed an adjustment period to the octagon, but I think his activity level has been starting to get up there, right? I think he's starting to get results commensurate with his skill level, right? I think he was underperforming when he first got to the UFC. And frankly, when I cashed that ticket on Matheus Nicolau, I felt very grateful. I felt very fortunate. Even at the plus money price, I was like, man, it's a close fight. And, Kape could have got this win, right? With a better strategy, with a better game plan, with a better performance on the night. Manel Kape easily could have taken that win. So I didn't think I had a massive edge at a small underdog price. Now, he is a bigger underdog in this spot, so you could argue that you're getting more potential line value, and he won the last time. I can't really push back on that, but this is a gut feeling sport sometimes as much as it is numbers and data sport. And my gut feeling is that you got one guy who's moving in one direction as a prospect and another guy who really just got checked as a prospect. The loss to Rival, brutal, bad knockout. It'd be one thing if that was the first time in his career that had happened. But unfortunately, against Dustin Ortiz back in the day, he suffered a brutal knockout loss in very similar fashion against Pedro Nobre back in 2012, another first-round knockout loss in brutal fashion. So this is a guy who has been subject to getting knocked down, to getting knocked out, to getting flashed, to getting buzzed, to getting hurt. And I really worry about that because in the flyweight division, for a guy his size, he's cutting a decent amount of weight, I'd have to assume. And, it doesn't get easier with age. It gets harder, right? And he's not that old a guy, right? These are both, prospect age fighters, looking at it. You got one guy who's 31 in Matheus Nicolau against a 30-year-old in Manel Kape. But for me, it just feels like Manel Kape is a little bit more durable. And I also think he's probably the more dangerous finisher. So if Nicolau is not able to get this fight to the ground, if he's not able to neutralize the power and the explosivity of Manel Kape, I think he's going to be in trouble on the feet because I don't know that he could take the shots from Manel Kape. And I think Manel is getting better at mixing up his targets, moving through space a little bit more. And I just think that Matheus Nicolau, I worry about where his confidence is going to be at coming off that knockout loss. That's very tough to deal with, right? And I think that when you're coming back from that against a guy who's got a surging wave of momentum against Manel Kape, who, by the way, is motivated to get that win back. I've said this before, but I always felt this in my personal experience. When I beat a guy, I never wanted to go again. I was like, that's it. I got the win. I'm cool, man. I don't ever need to do this again. But when you get that rematch, right, you have to find that motivation. You have to find that extra push. And it can be hard at times, right? It's hard to beat a good guy multiple times. It could be one thing to beat somebody good once, but to beat a good guy multiple times in a row, man, it gets really tough. Think about, the trilogy that we saw with Holloway and Volkanovski. Obviously, it's at a different level, but when you watch those, right, there was one time where Max Holloway looked like he really might have had it all figured out, and then they did it again, and it looked like, damn, Volk is better by a mile. It's like when you start running these fights back multiple times, even great fighters can start to get disparate results, or things could look very different. And I just think that right now, coming off that knockout loss in the first round, it's like a brutal reminder that, hey, I could get chin checked. It's happened to me before. It happened to me the last time. It happened to me 10 times ago. It happened to me in 2012. The way that I lose fights is I get buzzed on the chin, I get clipped, I get hurt. And this guy is a powerhouse. And this guy is violent and he's aggressive and he wants to come out here and hurt me. I think that's a horrible recipe, unfortunately. So I like Manel Kape in this one. Pre-tape, I got to do a little more research here, but I understand why he's the favorite here. Despite losing the first fight, I just think it's about context. It's about timing in this fight game. And I think Manel Kape is in a better situation. And I like his skill set, right now. I like his training. I like what Kape's doing. Give me Kape to get the win. Next up, guys, let's move to this featured bout of the evening. This is an interesting fight, right? Because we've got Jim Miller, A10, baby, taking on Gabriel Benitez. And both of these gentlemen coming off a win. Both of these gentlemen on the wrong side of 35. But Jim Miller is 40 years of age, right? And Gabriel Benitez is 35 and a hook, right? Halfway to 36 here. But he is also a very, seasoned UFC guy. These are both guys that have had a lot of experience in the UFC. So it should be a fascinating matchup. Now, I want to just shout out a couple of the people in the chat as well, because we've seen a lot of great contributions tonight. Shout out to Claire Kim with the very kind words, says, "You're the sharpest in UFC. I'd love to see your breakdown in boxing as well." Hey, well, thank you very much. I definitely won't have as seasoned an eye for watching boxing. I'll just level with you, but I always will try and do my very best research. So if I come to you guys with some boxing takes and some boxing opinions tomorrow before the day of reckoning, then know that I did give it some real thought, some effort, and some energy between now and then. So I appreciate that. And if anybody else has thoughts on the boxing, please let me know. Shout out to Marco Para, says Walker can come through Ankalaev, but he's a Pandora's box. You never know what to expect from him. Great point. Kristen made a similar point as well about, maybe not that consistency from Johnny Walker, but I would argue that we've seen a little bit more consistency since he's been at SBG Ireland, but certainly still a lot left to be desired from Johnny Walker. And Andrew says wrestling shoes are a huge deal and a ring versus a cage. That's a great point. We've seen other fighters notably struggle in the going back and forth between the ring and the cage. It's something that maybe doesn't get enough play and enough talk, but we know that the surface makes a huge difference in these fights. Otherwise, they would all just be uniform, right? But obviously certain places have different preferences and certain fighters have different preferences as well. Shout out to Atomic Alonzo. Next champ says Alonzo knocks out Johnny. Biggest regret of the last card. I picked Alonzo Menafield by KO1 or split decision. I didn't bet it at plus 200. Just absolute foolishness for me, and something I will live to regret. My boy Z's MMA, the purveyor of this mug, used to say passing a win is worse than a loss. And boy, oh boy, I felt it that day. So shout out to Z's for that. We'll take a sip to that. Shout out to Easy Bets as well. Welcome aboard, my brother. Shout out to MMA Line Mover. He's thinking Kape by sub. Kristen says Miller with an impressive surge at his advanced age, 4 finishes in his last 5 fights. No doubt. That's a great point by you. And his only loss in there, a decision to Alexander Hernandez. And, Alex Hernandez is a guy that, typically is known for those early finishes. And Jim is tough. He tends to be a pretty durable guy, especially in this latter portion of his career. He's done a good job of maintaining. The last time he was finished in a fight was against Charles Oliveira in 2018. This guy is an absolute road warrior of the highest level. And my gut feeling on this fight, guys, I'll just level with you off the rip, and then we'll get through the rest of the breakdown, is that I think Jim Miller is going to submit Gabriel Benitez. And the reason I feel that way is you look at Gabriel Benitez historically, he's 10-2 career to the submission, right? He's obviously very talented with his own grappling. But I think that you look at the Billy Quarantillo stoppage, obviously that's a TKO, but he was getting dominated from the back control in that fight. It was kind of a mercy stoppage there. I do think that a guy who's a little less violent and a little more committed to the grappling or a higher level black belt like a Jim Miller could have easily finished if they were in a similar position. Now, on the other side of things, We also saw, Gabriel Benitez went out there, swung hammer for hammer with David Onama, ended up getting finished in that spot. But then he bounced back with a win over Charlie Ontiveros. I mean, with all due respect, I think Charlie Ontiveros was kind of like a free square type of win. Hey, Mowgli, sorry that you got beat up in the last couple. Let's get you out there. Let's get you a win. Let's get you back on track. But now I think that the A side of this matchup is Jim Miller, right? I think that Jim Miller is a guy. It's done a lot of solids for the company. They're still signing the checks for him at 40 years of age. But, if they had ran out Jim Miller and it's against Patty Pimblett, right? It's against Chase Hooper. It's against somebody like this. I'd be thinking to myself, man, a young guy, they're trying to build him. They're trying to make a name off this guy. And they're using his name. But when I see Jim Miller against 35-year-old Mowgli Benitez, who just got back on track with a win in the UFC, but has only 2 wins in the UFC since 2018, are Justin James and Charlie Ontiveros. I mean, yeah, I think they're trying to give Jim Miller another winnable fight, right? And does it mean that he's a lock to win it? Obviously not. Right? It's a cage fight. He's 40 years of age, right? Let's be serious. Mowgli Benitez can knock out any man. But Jim Miller can knock out any man, right? And we've kind of seen Jim Miller's power, his calf kicking game. I've said this too as a potential theory. This is a good one, my man. Call me crazy. Jim Miller versus Dustin Poirier at UFC 300. I mean, I think it's a non-zero possibility that we see that fight. It would be a rematch. It would be two guys, two legends on the circuit, kind of looking for fights against other older guys, legends of the game. And, Dustin Poirier says that he's not really interested in fighting these young, hungry up-and-comers, right? He's kind of looking for the big fights, looking for guys that, have that legacy implication. And Jim Miller is a guy that he could go out there, run it back with, give him an honest rematch. Because honestly, Jim gave him a tough fight. Jim gave him those hard calf kicks in the early going and really made him had to dig deep and find another way to win that fight. So I think that, looking at the overall record, I'm just not sold on what I'm seeing from Gabriel Benitez. 7-6 overall in the UFC. Basically hanging on to that 500 record. Not a bad fighter, but a guy that is mostly meat and potatoes with the boxing. Has some submissions, but really not as much at the UFC level. And you're looking at Jim Miller. Is he beating the best guys in his recent run? No, but he's 25-16 in this company. He's a UFC lifer, damn it. I think he's going to go out there and smoke this guy, whether it's with that dangerous left hook or whether it's with that submission prowess. I just feel like Jim Miller, he's playing on Lyme disease. He's playing on lost time. This guy just finds a way to keep winning fights. And he doesn't look to me like a guy who's slowed down and had this massive regression. He seems very dangerous with his grappling. I think he's in there training, fighting all the time with the Miller Academy people. And I'll tell you what, New Jersey knows how to get down. They know how to wrestle. They know how to fight. And he's one of the toughest guys in Jersey. So give me Jimmy Miller to get the job done here. I think he's a slight underdog in this spot. I don't even have the odds pulled up. Let me pull up the odds here so we get a little more context, a little bit more color for you guys as we go. Jimmy Miller sitting at a plus 114 underdog. Yeah, man, that would be my lean. I also lean towards this under. Kristen, yes, I absolutely lean towards that. Jim Miller is a guy that tends to fight to the under, but in his losses, like I said, he's tended to go to decision, but a lot of those guys were grapplers. And Jim was kind of pulling guard, holding on to people a little bit, just fighting to get to the 15-minute bell. I do think his cardio is the one thing that's fallen off precipitously. So if Gabriel Benitez could extend this fight, make it go, into some extended positions, maybe that makes it tougher for Jim. But I just think Jim in rounds 1 and 2, he's got power in his hands. He's very committed to going out there and striking. He's not afraid of these young guys. And I also believe he's just higher level with his jiu-jitsu. He's very quality on the mat. And I think his old man jiu-jitsu is quality enough to beat Gabriel Benitez personally. TJ says, Liam, I honestly think you have some of the most educated takes in the Fight Picks game. Thank you so much, my brother. That's very kind of you to say. It's easy to say negative things in this world. I appreciate anybody that takes the time out of their day to say something positive about me, about the show. I really appreciate that. That means the world. Thank you, TJ. Next up, a girl that has made me coins one of my personal favorites, but she's been on a little bit of the rough run lately. Ketlen Vieira, right? Ketlen Vieira. We have stopped Brazilian hate with our girl Ketlen Vieira before. A lot of people were writing her off going into that Holly Holm fight. And I know a lot of people think that Holly Holm was robbed there, that she deserved the nod. Hey, we're just going to have to agree to disagree on that one. I thought Ketlen Vieira was the more dangerous fighter in that fight. I thought she did more damage in the clinch. I thought she was hurting Holm with some knees to the body. I thought she was being more impactful. And frankly, the thing that's always kept me, hesitant about Ketlen Vieira, especially after that home fight, is how hesitant she is to do damage to people. She seems like she's a very nice girl. She seems like she really doesn't want to hurt people. And she also seems just a touch timid. She used to be a lot more aggressive. If you watch her early UFC run, she's been around forever in the UFC, guys. You go back, she came to the organization in 2016. So the majority of her fights as a professional have been in the UFC, right? 11 fights in the UFC, and overall, she's had 17 fights. So more than 50% of her fights have been in the UFC. And if you look that early run, she was beating people up. She was getting these clear, unanimous decisions. She submitted Sarah McMahon, looked like she was all the goods. And then the split decision against Ngannou, man, she's on the fast track. Is she going to fight for a title? And then that title eliminator against Irene Aldana, she gets knocked out. It was brutal. It was a clean hook. Bang, caught her on the feet. And I do think of that as the turning point in her career, where she became a lot less confident, where she became a lot less willing to stand and trade with women on the feet with that kind of same intensity and that same pace and that trust in her power. So I think that Ketlen Vieira since then has been a little bit more reliant on the boxing, fundamentals to keep people at distance. And then she likes to grab a hold of them, use her size, leverage that in the clinch, get a hold of people. She's strong physically. She has a judo, a wrestling, a jiu-jitsu background. She's not going to be easily out positioned on the ground. What has happened to her in the past is an inability to mix her martial arts cleanly, right? The knockout loss to Irene Aldana, Aldana is the one girl she probably could have easily taken down over and over again and beaten up. And instead, she trades with her on the feet, gets knocked out. Okay, tough sledding. Then she goes against Sijara Eubanks. Sijara Eubanks has barely clung to a 500 record. So while she has the credentials in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, she really just hasn't had as easy a time in MMA making her game be effective. The Yana Santos fight, you look at that spot, she misses weight there. So probably was dealing with some stuff going into that fight, maybe an injury, maybe some women's issues. Just don't know exactly what caused her to miss weight. It's the only time in her career that she has missed the weight class, but she's a big girl, so understandable, doesn't make the weight, but she's fighting Yana Santos, and she ends up losing that fight, guys, basically on two things: optics and damage. She got cut open on her face in a fight where she won like 13 minutes. Like, I don't have the UFC stats in front of me, but she controlled basically everything up until the point where she got elbowed in the face and she's bleeding, ends up losing the fight, ends up giving it away in just those bad positions. So I felt like that was an indictment of her, but then they gave her these former champions, Misha Tate, Holly Holm, people that had the name, but not the substance, right? Like people that used to be the best in the division, but now they're almost like a shadow of themselves. They're like a fragment of what they used to be. And so I was like, yeah, maybe at their best, Ketlen Vieira couldn't compete with them, but I thought she was going to have too much physicality, too much youth, too much durability, too much staying power against Misha. And I also thought the exact same thing against Holly Holm. So those were the two times that I bet her on the money line. I did cash in both of those instances, betting on her. But now she's a massive favorite here against Macy Chiasson. And I bet on Macy Chiasson, if my memory serves. Let me pull this up because I don't want to speak out of my hat. But I believe the last time that Macy Chiasson fought against Irene Aldana, I had a bet on Macy Chiasson. Let me see if that's true. Yeah, absolutely disgusting. Plus 155, Macy Chiasson against Irene Aldana. If you guys go back and rewatch that fight, she was about 2 minutes away from winning a unanimous decision in all likelihood. Seemed like she was about to get the nod. She gets kicked from the bottom with a up kick to the body and goes down like she got shot by a gun. I mean, it was absolutely disgusting. One of the worst feelings I've ever had ever betting on a fight. I always say, if you're going to screw me, just go ahead and get knocked out in the first exchange like Gavin Tucker against Dan Ige, and let me just, cry over the bet right away. Hey, didn't work out, fold it up, throw it away. That's what I'd prefer. Don't string me along till the third round and keep telling me you've got hope. It's all going to turn out okay. And then bang, right at the end, right when my hope is up, right when I'm like, we got it. We're going to cash the ticket. We're going to cash the plus 155 dog. Bang, gunshot to the liver, and she goes down. So it was unfortunate there, but that was a spot where, learning lesson, right? Women's MMA, anything could happen right up to that final bell. I do think Macy Chiasson is, a little bit flaky. I think that's a good way to describe her. Where was that? Somebody said that in the comments, right? Tristan, my guy, thank you. You hit that on the head. He says Macy Chiasson is super flaky. I absolutely agree with you there. I think that that's a lot of sense that you're talking, when you look at Macy's career, she also got submitted after looking good against Raquel Pennington early in the second round. I think she slows down at times. I can't trust her cardio, and I can't trust her IQ. Just looking at her career. Also, the loss to Lena Landsberg, not terrible, but not great. She doesn't have any clear standout wins that are great, except for a split decision over Norma Dumont. So I think Chiasson is getting better, but I can't trust her. And the same thing can be said of Ketlen Vieira at the minus chalk price. So I think Ketlen wins. I expect her to win. I think she's a better fighter. I think she's more well-rounded and more skilled, but she's not aggressive enough and consistent enough to rely on her at minus 220 chalk prices. Shout out to Low T City Ortega. My brother from Canada says, much love, Liam. Happy holidays. Just curious if you have any quick, super early thoughts on my fellow Canadian, Mike Malott versus Magny coming up. I'm so glad that you asked that. Low T City Ortega, for all the live homies watching with us. I think that this is a very favorable matchup for Mike Malott. I haven't looked into the prices. I have no bets on the fight, but I think that Mike Malott should be the favorite. I think he should probably be pretty substantially favored, and I think that he's got a very good chance to finish Neil Magny if he's not a fool, right? I think that if Mike approaches this fight in a smart fashion, if he does not engage in the clinch, tying up, over-unders, I think that Mike Malott should make very easy work of Neil Magny with both his hand speed and power, as well as his submission acumen. I think he is a better grappler than Neil Magny. I think he is a far superior, submission hunter. I trust his game from the bottom position more than Neil Magny as well. So there's a lot of things I like about Mike Malott, but the things that I still have some curiosity about, what does his 3-round cardio look like? He's a guy that's mostly finished people in the first round, right? But I do think that if he is to get into an extended 15-minute fight with Neil Magny, could get a little bit dicier. But for me, I think Mike Malott should probably run through this guy. That's my honest opinion. I think he's a better fighter. I think he'd be a good star for the Canadian market. And I think it would be fun for everybody to sing, "Oh, Canada," as Mike Malott, their favorite son, gets the win. So yeah, give me Mike. But back to this card, UFC Vegas 84. We've got our next matchup. Ricky Simon taking on Mario Bautista. And this is a fascinating matchup. I got to say thank you again, though, for the dono, brother. That's huge. Very kind of you right before Christmas time. What a kind and thoughtful donation. I appreciate that. But back to this, right? Ricky Simon, Ricky, coming off that tough loss, right? Got brutally finished in his last fight. It was a really tough 5-rounder there. Went to the 5th round, and that 5th round, it was just too much. Song Yadong was getting the better of him for most of that fight. It felt like, certainly seemed like a ball rolling downhill, right? Ricky had some success in the early going, but just seemed like he was getting fought out of the fight, from, probably round 3 on. I have to go back and rewatch that fight, but I just don't have memory of Ricky Simon looking very competitive there. I felt like it looked pretty one-sided. for Song Yadong after a certain point. And Ricky Simone, 8-3 record in the UFC. I mean, that's certainly nothing to sneeze at. Very talented guy. And the wins, Jack Shore, I think he was an underdog in that spot, went out there and delivered. Rafael Sunsao, I think he was heavily favored there, went out there and delivered. Big knockout, thunderous. Brian Boom Kelleher went out there, wrestled him to a decision, grinded it out, did what he had to do to get the win. Gaetano Pirelli got the submission in that spot, handled business accordingly. The Ray Borg split decision, I do think, is something to look at when you're looking at this fight, right? A guy that was able to use some hand speed, that was able to use some counter wrestling and some strength and some creativity to really make it a tough fight for him. You look at Ricky Simone's best wins. I mean, I'd have to say a Sun Tzu, who is past prime. Jack Shore, that was a great win. Hani Yaya, very solid win. Montel Jackson, very solid win, all the way back in 2018. Murav Dvalishvili, I mean, that's kind of a toss-up. A lot of people don't think he won that fight. To each their own. Anderson Dos Santos, kind of a journeyman guy, back in 2016, was able to submit Ricky. So Ricky's obviously come a long way since then, since he's been in the UFC. The pseudo win over Merab, like I said, the win over Montel Jackson, Hani Yaya, but then the knockout loss to Uriah Faber really set back his momentum, right? Then he goes out there, he loses a close one to Rob Font, but the takedowns weren't working. He wasn't able to get on top. He wasn't able to get his game going. And when I'm looking at a fight like this, I have to say, Mario Bautista is 30 years of age, right? He does not have the same amount of experience, but he's slightly younger here. He's the slightly smaller guy in terms of the reach, but he is going to have a height advantage in this spot. And I'm looking at a guy in Ricky Simone who I do worry just ever so slightly about the confidence coming into this fight. Coming off a stoppage loss, that's not the first time that has happened to him. Excuse me. You've got Mario Bautista, who's 7-2 in the UFC, and both of his losses are via stoppage. But he had the very unfortunate task of debuting against Corey Sandhagen, and he got submitted via armbar in the first round there. Brutal fight. Corey was beating him up, basically just mugged him, right? Beat him up on the feet, took that arm home with him. Brutal fight, bleeding, right? And then he got back on track, beat Jin Soo Sun, who I've been watching the UFC every weekend for as long as I can remember. I don't know who Jin Soo Sun is. I'd have to rewatch the fight. Much love and respect to him. I'm sure he's a great guy. But Miles Johns, I thought that was a very winnable fight for Bautista. Looking at Trevin Jones, that was a surprising one, right? I don't think many people expected that. And Trevin Jones has since been released from the promotion. You look at the Jay Perrin win. Doesn't age great, right? Jay Perrin no longer with the promotion. Brian Boom Kelleher submitted him in the first round. That's a great win. Although Brian didn't look his best in that fight. Benito Lopez, guy who'd been away for a while, not really a great win, honestly. I thought that was a layup. Thought that was an easy fight for him on paper. Guido Canetti, again, not really doing much for me, right? Guido Canetti, he's a guy where I'm looking at that saying, man, he's older, he's past prime, he's a kickboxer. What is this really telling me that Mario Bautista is out here out grappling some guys that are favorable matchups? The thing that really put me over the edge is, man, Mario Bautista going out there and getting the win over Damon Blackshear. I've had a hard time rating Damon Blackshear, right? I just can't get a grasp for how good this guy actually is. But one thing I can tell you, 9-0 career to the submission. This guy, Damon Blackshear, he could put it together on the ground, right? He's got a twister, one of 3 in the history of the organization, right? So he clearly knows what he's doing on the mat. Mario Bautista was able to outvolume him and able to outwork him over the course of those 15 minutes, get the unanimous decision against a very tough guy, against a good fighter. I believe that was on short notice for Damon as well. 5-round fight, maybe Damon Blackshear takes that one, but unfortunately that 3-rounder, Mario Bautista was able to get the job done. And in this spot, we got a 3-rounder, right? And we've seen Ricky Simone drop these 3-round decisions before. So here's what's interesting, right? I don't think Mario Bautista is a slouch in the wrestling, right? I think Ricky's going to be stronger. He's going to be a little more physical. I think he's got pretty decent tools in the boxing. But if he's not able to hurt Bautista, then I think that Bautista is a little bit faster. I think he's going to be able to move in and out on Ricky a little bit. I don't think he's going to get punked in the wrestling. I think he might be able to compete there. And I don't think he's going to get punked in the jiu-jitsu either. So it just seems to me like this could be a really competitive fight. This could be a fight where you're looking at a split decision type scenario. And, one guy is coming off a knockout loss. You're being asked to pay chalk. The other guy is coming off a string of nice wins, good performances. You're getting plus money by his name. For me, it feels like a dogger pass for that reason. But, I got to do the tape. Excuse me, do my due diligence and make sure that that all checks out. But that's just how I feel gut level. Ricky has more experience overall as a professional, but at the highest level, these guys both have a pretty similar level of experience. And Bautista seems to be putting it together on a good run and not really getting the respect of the betting public here. Next up, guys, speaking of guys coming back off of a knockout loss, you've got, on the one hand, Phil Hawes coming off of a brutal knockout loss in his last fight against Ikram Alaskarov, heavily touted prospect, but he also got brutally finished by Roman Dolidze after getting his leg torn apart on the ground. Like, Phil Hawes can't catch a break. His nickname is No Hype. It should be No Breaks, Phil Hawes. I mean, this guy just can't catch a break right now. A lot of bad results recently. His only win is over Duran Win, a comically undersized middleweight. And I'm a short king. A lot of short kings out there. God bless you all. But when I'm looking at that Duran win, I'm not really sold on it. The Chris Curtis loss, I can forgive. High level guy on short notice there. But the Dawkins win was close, right? It was tough sledding. The Nasruddin Imavov win, it was very close. It was tough sledding. The Jacob Malkoun win is a great win, but Jacob Malkoun, I think, had 4 fights at that time. What was crazy is Hawes was actually booked last time in New Jersey. So shout out to my boy Line Mover. Hawes is still my boy. He says he was booked last time in Jersey, and it did not go very well at all, unfortunately. So I'm looking at, a guy in Hawes who's been stopped many times, who's dealt with some serious injuries, and I just don't think that I'm there. I don't think I'm there with Phil Hawes. On the other side, you got Bruno Ferreira. It's another opportunity to stop Brazilian hate. You know that I love to do that. He beat Gregory Rodriguez, knockout, first round. That put him on the map, right? That sent him, up the attention meter. And he went from being an underdog against Gregory Rodriguez, getting the big knockout, surprising everybody, to being a favorite, right? Pretty substantially against Nursultan Ruziboev. I bet Ruziboev in that spot. Everybody said Ruziboev's a fraud. He's having fixed fights. He's doing this, that, and the other thing. Hey, it all worked out just fine when he punched that guy right in the face early in the fight. This guy is still big. He's long. He's foreign, right? He just seemed like he was in there to diddy bop. Phil Hawes, on the other hand, he does not have that same kind of momentum. He's coming off of 2 brutal losses, right? Kind of losses that could change your life, change your career. Unfortunately, I'm not trying to make light of that. I'm just trying to be realistic. And I don't like this situation for him at all. I'll just level with you guys and tell you the God's honest truth. My exact thought when they booked that Ikram Alaskarov fight, and it's a regret that I didn't bet Ikram and Ikram round 1 and Ikram ITD, because I should have. But the reason I didn't bet it was because Hawes was from New Jersey and Hawes was a tough guy and he had all this experience. But the God's honest truth is the first thought that I had when